A few months ago, I was given a gift card which I used to purchase the Crypt of Blood Warcry starter set. Mostly being a sci-fi and 40k guy, I was really excited by these miniatures and a chance to learn a game all in one box. The box that came with a booklet with rules and lore specific to the set, terrain, dice, Xandire's Truthseekers warband, as well as the Crimson Court warband. Also a bunch of markers and tokens. I've been back in the Warhammer hobby for just a little over a year now, but I've been pretty new to the world of fantasy. And after I finished Hexbane's Hunters, I thought this would be a great project to tackle. Not to mention, I also get to try out my brand new Army Painter Speed Paint Metallic set, so stay tuned. With 3 sprues that are arguably push fit, I was able to build everything in about an hour. As you'll see in this video, however, I may have rushed a few mold lines here and there, but that's okay, because this is supposed to be a starter set, and we're supposed to be able to get these on the table to play as soon as possible. The Crimson Court has Prince Duval, Gorth the Enforcer, Velis von Fane, and Ennius Curseborn, while Xandire's Truthseekers is Calthea, Luxa, Taros the Bird, and Doraz Giantfell. I recently upgraded to an Iwata Eclipse airbrush, which has been an amazing tool, but for today's video, we'll just be using it to prime. With Vallejo Black Spray on Primer, I go to town on all the miniatures. Then I apply a zenithal highlight to the models using Golden's Titanium White. I go about spraying from above, as well as a little bit to the side to make sure that it's not all completely dark underneath. For a good measure, I also do it to all my terrain as well. Seeing everything primed and highlighted got me pretty excited about the potential of what this set could look like. But as you'll soon see, I started running into some roadblocks. Starting with Calthea Xandire herself, I thought things would go fairly smoothly. After all, it seemed like the Eternals were like the fantasy equivalent of Space Marines, but oh man did it get complicated. Taking Mystic Blue Vallejo Express color as well as Express Medium, I mixed it into my dry palette and began to paint on the cloak. Now hold on one second. So I only just found out recently, but Express colors should only be used over paint primer. That is something to do with the molecular structure that allows for the paint to properly cover it. Remember the golden white? That is not a primer. Next time, I'll just use a white primer to zenithal highlight, but for now, just keep that in mind as I continue painting. You can see that the paint is not quite going on as smoothly as it should, but I power through blissfully unaware of my mistakes at the time, just adding more layers of the Express color on the rest of the warband. Hindsight is 20/20. In my head, for Calthea, it made sense to do the cloak first since it was a one-coat paint, and then Calthea's face was going to be used with more traditional paint. But my goodness, this was difficult to paint. I'm still by no means an expert, but for anyone who's getting into the hobby for the first time and this is their first kit, it is very frustrating and difficult to paint, especially since you will not have proper brush control. I started with a base layer of Cadian Flesh Tone and then added Reikland Flesh Shade. It felt like the start to something, but I felt a little disheartened. To get my excitement back up, I decided to move on to applying my new Army Painter Speed Paint Metallics, which I got specifically for this starter kit project. Before each use, you'll want to make sure to vigorously shake the bottles to make sure that the medium and pigment are properly mixed. Personally, for me, I'm impatient and lazy, so I just tape the bottles to my Theragun and give it a quick shake. Some more advice on what not to do with this speed paint. Do not keep it on your wet palette. The pigment and medium will separate fairly quickly and you'll end up needing to use more paint. Use a regular palette. This all may seem a little demanding, it's very much worth using. The paint is incredibly watery and flows well over the surface. It almost looks like mercury. You still have to be careful though because it will be more affected by water tension and may spread to the wrong areas of your model if you add too much paint or if you didn't properly mix it and it's watered down. While the speed paint metallics are considered one-coat paints, they do lack the transparent nature of other speed paints, express colors, and contrast paints. So inevitably, my zenithal highlight ends up doing very little on this miniature. That's okay. Allowing them a little time to dry, I add an accent color red to the sword sheath, and then get to doing a null wash over the metallics. And I have to say, I'm very happy with the results of this. Now, for the lantern, I want to add another speed paint, so I grab Brazen Copper, and seriously, look at this separation. Mix your paints. After applying the Brazen Copper to the entirety of the lantern, I go through and add a base coat of red and then yellow on top to give it a little glow effect. I was still not happy with Calthea's face, so I had this brush cleaner from Vallejo I thought was worth trying. So I applied a small amount to the face, let it sit for 30 seconds, wiped off the excess moisture, stripped away some of the paint, repeating the process as necessary. This gave me a second chance at painting the face, and while my final result wasn't perfect, it was still better than the first. Now that I had the general color scheme down, I was ready to move on to Doors? Whatever. Anyways, he was looking to be much easier. I wanted to redeem myself, so I started with Vallejo medium flesh tone on his head. Then a wash of Reichland flesh shade resulted in a face that already looked better. I'm telling you, it's the hood that makes everything difficult. Using the speed paint metallics again, this time with a better understanding, it went on super well. Turns out I just needed to practice. I also ended up using polished silver speed paint for the hammer and added another accent of red for the handle. For his hair, I added a very light tan base coat, which I then carefully added white highlights to. I then began to very carefully add highlights to the raised edges of his face. And with a Nuln Oil wash over his metal, he was looking good. Then there was Luxa with her fully covered golden mask, probably the easiest of the bunch for me to paint. Just slapped on some of that speed paint golden armor all over neatly as possible and then added my accent colors. I had never painted a bird before, but I was excited to actually get a use out of my Zenithal highlight. I base coated the bird with Crocscore Scales contrast paint and Dark Oath Flesh for the tree stump. I highlighted the tops of the wings and feathers with Jade Green from Vallejo. Mixing in a little bit of white, I add another layer of highlights. Then use Flash Gets Yellow to pick out the claws and beak, and as a creative decision, add white spots to its body. I add an orange wash to the beak and claws, and then edge highlight the stump, finishing up with a wash of Agrax Earthshade. Now it's time for the Crimson Court. Because there is no red metallics in the set, I started off with polished silver with the intention of going over it with the red speed paint. For my first time painting an undead, I used Pallid Witch Flesh to paint over the skin, and then over that I used Drakenhof Nightshade in order to create shading as well as give it to a nice undead blue. Over that I added more Pallid Flesh and brought down the brightness using a layer of Nuln Oil. Introducing color with Ball Red, I paint over the metallic armor, and then paint the eyes with Spiritstone Red, making the model worthy of the Crimson Court. With Brazen Copper, I use that to make accents on the armor, and then use Nuln Oil to create shadowing over the entirety of it. Grabbing Bloody Red, I use this to highlight my red armor. Unfortunately, this does end up resulting in losing some sheen. I end up using Glorious Gold in order to highlight some of the Brazen Copper, and then over my highlights I go over again with some Ball Red in order to bring down some of the intensity. What was really tricky with this warband is that they were much more unique in their designs than Xandire's Truthseekers, so it was a bit more difficult to figure out how best to paint them, and with Gorath the Enforcer I wanted to embrace some more of that uniqueness while still making sure he looked like a member of the Crimson Court. So as you can see here, I gave him a base coat of purple for his skin, with a black base coat for his armor gave a nice contrasting look. I used polished silver for his weapon and accents for his armor. Then I took some extra time to panel line his armor with white. I layered Genestealer Purple for his skin, and then Cacophony Purple for a final highlight. This was probably my favorite skin I've done so far for this whole set. I then added some Bloody Red to give a little bit more edge highlight to his cape. For Velis Von Fane, I decided to make her a bit more matched with Prince Deval, using Ball Red contrast paint as her primary color. For accents, I used polished silver and polished gold. To give her a little more vibrancy, I added Hexwrath Flame contrast paint for her hair. Adding layers in the appropriate places, painting the base black, and giving her a gnome wash, she was all wrapped up. For the final member of the court, Ennius had a lot more skin showing. Being the more monstrous of the group, he also had these big wings to contend with. I started off with a dark gray for his skin and built on more layers on the raised edges. I was worried that when I added polished silver he would look a little drab, but giving him red pants, a vibrant set of wings, and hair, he was starting to come together. Tried to add a little bit more details. I added thin, bright blue lines and then another layer of shorter white lines to his wings. Even after all of the work done so far, we still had terrain. I wanted to add this aged, oxidized effect to the metals of the terrain, so I started with a polished gold and then went over with Nihilach Oxide Technical Paint. After all that dried, I went over with a dry brush of bright bronze, leaving you with this effect. We're going to be enhancing this a little bit more later. Wanted to make use of my Zenithal highlight, I used Crocscore Scales contrast paint for the bricks and stones of some of the terrain pieces. For the Crypt, I originally used Aztec Gold Speed Metallics, but wasn't liking the color coordination so much, so I experimented with adding Stonewall Gray to the other half and found it much more appealing. I liked it so much I ended up adding it to other pieces, just to show how much of painting is a process for experimenting. Adding a Gnome Wash, I got some additional depth, added some edge highlights as well as some layers. For the Bowl of Blood, I used Ball Red. and washed it with Drakenhof Nightshade. While the terrain was coming together nicely, it was still pretty exhausting to work on. There were so many little details like vines, skulls, tombstones. I just kind of reflected on the entire set and thought about what this would be like being someone's first ever Warhammer kit. And while I was able to take a fulfilling experience from it personally, there is a very high possibility that a painter just starting out may be a little frustrated. My painting is nowhere near the box art, but it still took a lot of time to get it to the level it was at in this video. Well, before we take a look at the final results, if you haven't done so already, hit that like and subscribe button. It's what keeps me making these videos and pushes me to be a better painter. Thank you so much for watching so far, and let's look at the grand reveal. You'll notice I decided to skip out on adding additional details to my model's bases. The reason for this is because I knew I could always go back and add more in the future, but I had already spent so much time on this project already, and I could feel I just wasn't having as much joy in painting this. And I think that's important for us as hobbyists to acknowledge that we can exhaust ourselves when we try to be perfectionist, and that's how we end up with unfinished minis and not playing the game. I'm so proud that I could slay the gray, and I'm excited to share a playthrough of this set in an upcoming video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!